Excellent. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. So this is the African Views interview, and we are going to be interviewing Dr. Garvey. It's a pleasure to have you joining us today, sir. And how are you doing today?
Quite fine, thank you. It's I'm in New York, and I think there's some snow on the way, but right now it's pretty okay. So it's my pleasure to be part of this process.
I appreciate you taking the time out of your day, and we will be discussing what your take was on, and this is regarding the Maroon Day in Suriname, and this was on October 10th of 2023. It's been a couple months after the event happened. I do believe you have a fresh memory to let us know how those festivities, really had a great impact on your role with with the chieftaincy that was bestowed upon you. And I'd like to begin with that. And if you can recall anything that on that day, how much of an impact has it had on what your role is going to be in terms of bridging the gap between us as a Black people, really, diaspora in Suriname?
Well, it's a big question, and it's more than simply the Maroon Day. And I think we have to begin with African views, and my good friend Wally, who I've known, Wally Ajidabi, who I've known for, I don't know, Wally, probably more than 20 years. We've been to Trinidad together, et cetera, and interacted over time. And he invited me to participate in this fabulous cultural event, bringing African chiefs and African culture and African traditions really to the Caribbean, specifically to Suriname. And of course, the Surinamese, have a very specific history in terms of a maroon population that escaped, shall we say, from slavery and created their own environment in the forest, which is basically an Amazon-type forest. So it was an idea of Wallace to sort of bridge the gap, shall we say, between the diaspora and the continent. And I'm very pleased that he involved me in it. And so that it was an event that lasted several days. I mean, part of the climax was the celebration of the Maroon Day on the 10th. But it was wonderful to meet the people there and to meet, of course, the vice president, but we also met the president, we met the cabinet, and so on. And of course, I was able to meet, so many distinguished traditional leaders and chiefs of the African continent, from Kenya, from Nigeria, from Ghana, and Niger. So that was fabulous. So I'm kind of bubbling over. I don't know where to stop, so to speak, or where to focus. But it was a fabulous event, and maybe you can get down to specifics from there.
Absolutely. How do you think? How important is it for Black people to be able to attend such an event in terms of being educated and being aware of this very rich culture in Suriname? How big of an impact do you think it is for them to be educated on this?
Right, and I prefer to use African people, not Black people, because I don't focus on the melanin. I focus on who we are in terms of Homo sapiens sapiens, 200,000 years of us populating the world, and our civilizations and our history and our traditions. So I think it's of extreme importance. And of course, as you know, both the slave trade and colonialism disconnected us as African people from the continent. Those of us in the diaspora. I myself was born in Jamaica, and I've lived in the diaspora most of my life in Canada as well as in the United States. So I'm a diaspora product, and it was fantastic to participate in something like this, which is more than historical, because something historical you can read in a book and you say this happened in the 18th century, or this was that kingdom, etc., etc. But this was a cultural event, and that was the importance of it, to be able to rub shoulders, shall we say, with African culture, in terms of a way of life in terms of an ideology, in terms of spiritual traditions. All of this was manifested. For example, the Ifa ceremony that we went through, which is part of Yoruba culture, and that's part of the African, spiritual tradition. And, so many, other different little individual things. Again, as I mentioned, people, kings, from Kenya as well as from Niger, with that particular perspective, like, for example, Niger going back to the ancient Mali kingdom and so on. So it was a coming together of a great deal of culture in one place. So for me as a diaspora person, I was sort of soaking it up. I mean, I knew some of the history, etc., but I was soaking it up culturally in terms of, my roots, shall we say, dipping my roots into African culture itself. So it was a very heartwarming, shall we say, or more or less strengthening my Africanness, to be within or surrounded by and within the company of the African traditions and African culture, and then sharing that with the Maroons, again,
Yes.
the diaspora population. So it was a bridge, and I was part of the bridge, and I appreciated being a part of the bridge.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, diving into the African boy and the African girl in society. Now, you did mention, and I quote, and this was at a National Press Club, and I quote, "The civil rights movement started with Marcus Garvey, and it was acknowledged by Brother Malcolm and Martin Luther King. And it was also acknowledged by anyone who knows history and the present and stands by the foundation that this is the right time to connect the dots, because this is between 1916 and 2016, like that 100 years. My question is, you did mention that the system has not changed at all in order to give the African boy and the African girl dignity and their place in society. Now, considering we have this rich culture in Suriname and a festive date on October 10th of 2023, what can we do better as a society, specifically where we are now in the United States? What can we do better to help the African boy and the African girl have their mark in society and to preserve their dignity?
Well, I don't think there's specifically something that the African person in the United States can do. We cannot look at it from bunkers, and this is one of the problems that we have had. And if we go back to that statement that you quoted, my father wasn't just in a sense the precursor of the civil rights movement, but he was a cultural activist. He was an Africanist. He was an anti-colonial, champion, and he inspired people such as Kwame Nkrumah and Nnamdi Azikiwe and so many others in terms of the African liberation movement itself. And what he was about was uniting Africans all over the world. As he said, the Universal Negro Improvement Association was about Africa for Africans, those at home and those abroad. So the transformation that you're pointing to cannot be done by Africans in America. It cannot be done by Africans in Suriname or in the Caribbean, or it even cannot be done by Africans in Africa by themselves. It has to be done by us in unity. And interestingly enough, I was recently at the reparations conference in Accra, Ghana, in November. And this brought all of us together, meaning African Americans, the CARICOM people, as well as people from Africa. It was hosted by President Adu of Ghana, coming together relative to making our case for reparations, meaning a repair of the damage that has been done to us over the last 400 years of chattel slavery as well as colonialism. So it's a global process, and the process has to be two things. One is the healing of ourselves as a people, and two is the transformation of the system that exists that has exploited us, because it's the same system that continues to exploit us today. So it's not about us simply saying we want reparations in terms of any sort of monetary compensation. It's not about monetary compensation. It's about transforming the direction in which the world is going, which with European hegemony, it has been going in the wrong direction. Where, it's all about, taking people's resources, and it doesn't matter whether you destroy the people or even use up the resources which are not sustainable, but it's a system that is not sustainable over time. And of course, at the present time, we can see that in terms of climate change, etc. So there's an urgency for us as a people. We have 1.5 billion people. If there's a time for us as a people to come together to transform the system that's external to us, and then to transform our own trajectory that has been incarcerated by the system. And that is a key component that we have to do. And I think that was part of what was being done. And I praise Wally for bringing that about in terms of bringing the kings and queens from Africa to those of us in the diaspora. We need that degree of unity in order to heal the problems that we've had in terms of the disconnect of us in the diaspora from the continent itself, in terms of culture, traditions, and history. So that's significant, the healing part of it.
The healing. I certainly agree with you on that. Now, considering the fact that technology is playing a huge role in terms of how the younger generation of today communicates, gets educated, shares information, is this an avenue that you are going to utilize in your role as, with the chieftainship, with this African king? Is it something that you're going to be utilizing as well? Or do you think that going by traditional means will preserve the culture a little bit better?
No, and my father did wonders with his own speaking voice and with the newspaper. He was able to pull together in excess of 6 million people. But we have IT information technology at the present time, the internet and everything, all the way up to robotics and that whole process of digitization and the way of communication really that is instantaneous and expands around the globe. Whether you have a computer or you have your smartphone, if you can get all the information that you want, simply through your phone. So yes, we have to use those systems. But what the problem is that the platforms of those systems are not owned by us. So we have to own those platforms, and we have to direct the use of those platforms to tell our own story, to tell our own history, and to move forward in terms of our own developmental processes, because that's where everything is going. It's a knowledge-based society, and it's an innovative society, and those are the means of education, knowledge transfer, and innovation and creativity. So we have to be on top of that. And yes, that's my portfolio.
Absolutely. And also considering that with African views, we now have the ARK, with the royal kingdoms, that's bringing back the royalty, where it belongs, enriching our culture even further and just further developing really the youth. It's something that it's very substantial for the youth to be embedded in this movement, right, by African views. And, with what you, Dr. Garvey, and Dr. Wale are really, a champion on. I'm curious to see, like, for this upcoming year, for 2024, October 10, 2024, is there something that, if, obviously you were going to be part of it, is there something different that you would do in 2024 that would bring even more people from these different areas so that they can enjoy also the rich culture in Suriname? Is it something different that you think should be embedded or that is being worked on?
Well, I think we're in an era of change, and change, once it has started, it tends to become rapid. So I think 2024 is going to be even more noteworthy in terms of transformation. And we're moving away from the hegemony of Europe and the United States in particular to a multipolar and multipolar society. Meaning that, China, Russia, Asia, Latin America are on the rise. Certainly also the Caribbean. We know about the BRICS and so on and so forth. Personally, I've had, interesting experiences, shall we say. As a matter of fact, shortly after, going to Suriname, I went to Africa and Nigeria, which was another door of return. Through Badagry, which is a port that many enslaved Africans came through, just the same way as the ports in Ghana, as well as in Dakar, Senegal. So this was my first time in Badagry. But that has also opened up a whole nother area in terms of with Nigeria. So that, and several of the royals who were on this trip to Suriname are from Nigeria. So from my perspective, Nigeria is in play. Certainly, we want to continue with the shall we say, the return to Nigeria through the door of Badagry, with Lagos State, with Ogun State, and Osun State, etc. So that is part of what is on my horizon. Shall we say, for 2024, expanding, that whole effort that we've been doing all along, in terms of, as you mentioned, the IT part of it, in terms of our ability to communicate, and really, grounding ourselves, shall we say, on the continent. As you know, Wally African Views is in Ghana. Several of the royals were from Ghana. I just mentioned, Nigeria. Also, there were those from Kenya. So we have plans along those lines to expand, those contacts that have been made, so that we link the diaspora much more strongly. And look at just in terms of tourism, shall we say, and visits from that perspective, but it gets deeper into the whole business of trade and commerce and communication. We need to know what's happening in different parts of Africa on a day-to-day basis. And Africans need to know what's happening in the diaspora, the Caribbean, Latin America, etc., US and Canada on a day-to-day basis. So we need those communication channels to be developed, as you brought up the communication part of it. So that has to be developed, and the businesses have to be developed in terms of, again, it's not just communication by radio or TV, but it has to be communication by airlines. There's no reason why somebody from the Caribbean who is going to Nigeria has to go through Europe or North America, or vice versa. If you're going from Nigeria to Kingston, Jamaica, you don't have to go through Miami or what have you. It's a 6 or 7 hour flight, straight from Lagos to Kingston, Jamaica, or to Barbados. So those things need to be developed, and those things are in the air, and that's what's coming up, shall we say, in 2024.
Let's touch a little bit on economics and commerce. Now, in terms of international trade, that's very impactful when it comes to developing any nation, really, because of the foreign, with the exchange in terms of be it services, goods, or currency. As a nation, with Suriname, how, if we were to measure how their relationship is with like international trade, do you think there is room for improvement for Suriname? And also, do you think the Africans that are in this diaspora, right, because we're spread everywhere, do you think they could do a little bit more in terms of strengthening this trade relationship?
Oh, yeah, not just a little bit more, a lot more. I mean, a country like Suriname, I mean, it has vast resources that are untapped. It's part of the Amazon, shall we say, rainforest, and they've been doing very well in terms of, you know, maintaining the integrity of the rainforest. But in terms of, you know, development potential, it's enormous, and you know, if you just look at where it's situated next to Guyana, it's next to Venezuela there on the northern coast of South America. Right now, Guyana is the fastest, one of the fastest developing countries in the world because of the oil that has been found there, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, that's looking to expand in terms of the Caribbean and so on. So, you know, Suriname is in the same position. Whether they have found oil or not, they have significant resources, both in terms of gold and other minerals, as well as agricultural resources and the manufacturing that would go along with that. So yes, that has to be the shall we say, the next phase. You know, there is the cultural, you know, connection, and there's the possibility of increased tourism, but there has to be the economic development aspect of it, so that, you know, people can't just remain in that subsistence type of economy, but they need to develop based on the resources that they have on the ground and under the ground, and it's there. So, you know, that's the next phase, shall we say, is the investment phase that would then, you know, develop the whole business of industry, local industry, and therefore commerce and trade.
Now, do you have any plans on working alongside the government of Suriname in terms of what their goals are in, you know, in developing the country, and what your goals are in terms of bringing in, bridging in this gap with the African nations? Do you plan on working alongside, or are these going to be two separate, different goals?
I would say a yes to that, but obviously I defer to Wally, because I went there under the auspices of you know, African views and the ARK, the African Royal Kingdoms. So I think it has to be a group effort, and I would be subservient to the manifesto that we develop as a group, not
Absolutely.
myself as an individual, you know, going forward with a development plan. So
Right.
that is in the works, and I'm going to be happy to participate in that.
And that is highly commendable, because it is, you know, bringing in, you know, these different nuances that have a similar goal, and also for developing, you know, us as a people too, you know, including myself as a person. I want to diverge back into the education system. It's very important, really, that our children get developed in a sense that they know who they are, and they know, you know, that they do have a place in societies that are rich in culture, such as this, you know, with Suriname. What do you think can be improved upon when it comes to the education curriculum? Is it something that you think it needs to be revisited completely, or should it just be developed completely, like new?
Well, pretty much, you know, developed completely new, because the educational process, as you know, is really a miseducational process. It's as if to say history started with the Greeks and the Romans, and they were barbarians, while we as African people had been civilized and thousands upon thousands, at least 3,000 or 4,000 years, while they were still barbarians in Europe. And they learned from us in terms of the Greeks and the Romans coming into Kemet and learning from us. All of their, you know, so-called, you know, philosophers and bright lights, you know, from Pythagoras to Plato to Socrates, and you can go on and on, Aristotle, and all of them went to Kemet to learn. But that whole understanding has been transformed in the 17th and 18th century. Of course, the books were burned all the way back from the 4th century by the Romans, etc., who were, you know, creating Catholicism as a religion and destroying its connection to Africa. So out of that, Europe went into the Dark Ages, but we can't go deeper into that. But yes, it's a miseducation process because civilization didn't start with the Europeans, and one can really question whether Europe has ever attained civilization, because civilization has to mean that you're able to live civilly with yourselves as well as with your neighbors. And that has not been the case in Europe from its inception. The Greeks were fighting the Romans, and the Romans were fighting the Visigoths, and you can go on, and the Germans were fighting the French, and the French were fighting the English, and then it became a World War I and a World War II, and then they're fighting the Koreans and the Vietnamese, and it's on and on. And of course, right now there's a proxy war against the Russians, really using the Ukrainians as puppets. So we have to rewrite the history and correct the history, shall we say. I wouldn't even say rewrite it. We have to correct the history.
Absolutely.
There are great historians, such as someone like Robin Walker in England, who has written When We Ruled, as well as others. And in Jamaica, for example, for the first time, you might say, and it's surprising, we're now going to be teaching Marcus Garvey in schools. And can you believe that Jamaica has been independent since 1962, but the first national hero, Marcus Garvey, was not being taught in the schools? And that's the kind of mentality, the slavery mentality that still exists, so that we have not revised our curricula. So that has to be done, and that's a major problem, because we still continue with mental slavery, as my father called it, Bob Marley, popularizing, we must liberate our minds from mental slavery, because while others may help us to free the body, none but ourselves can free the mind. And this is of extreme importance. We're still using European definitions in terms of what is considered to be reality. They don't know what reality is, because they use the five senses, but we have a sixth sense, which is a spiritual self, and we know the essence of absolute reality as well as relative reality. But I'm not going to go into all of that. But yes, we do need to correct the problems with the educational process. And it's very, very urgent, because our youth need that for them to develop themselves to their full capacity.
Yes, and I agree on that. And just jumping on that, and we're almost about to conclude. What would you like to see the youth do more?
Well, it's not so much what we would like to see the youth do more. I think we need to do more for the youth, because we have not given them a platform from which they can grow and develop in the right direction. So they're out there scrambling and trying to make it up as they go along. And that's the sad situation in which they are. And when you look at the African youth, I mean, they're running away from Africa. They're dying in the Sahara Desert. They're dying they're going over there to Arab countries, male and female are being used and abused. They're going to Europe. They're dying in the Mediterranean. So they're reaching out, and we're the ones that are failing them. So we really need to put these systems in place. Plus the fact we need to really train them in skills. We need development, at home in Africa and in the Caribbean and diaspora, but we need to train them in skills so that they can have jobs. We have 60% youth unemployment at the present time in Africa. We have 100,000 young people in Africa that are not part of the educational system. I mean, those are, our own crimes against our own humanity. So those are things that need to be corrected.
I agree with you, and this is why we have such a platform with African Views, because not only is it educating them, it's also bringing them awareness. And also for us who are not the youth anymore, we do need to do a little bit better.
Speak for yourself. I'm still young.
Oh, that's right. You're very young. You and Dr. Wale are like, right there. And this is why it's very important, right, for platforms such as these, for them to be a part of and to see us not just only talking, but also being actionable. So it's the action part of it that I think we've done enough talking. I want to say there's been awareness since the civil rights movement was from 1916, right? That's 1916. We are past 100 years now. and it's too much talking. Now, the last thing I would like for you to provide is for October 10th of 2024 for the Maroon Day Festival, and with African Views, obviously, what would you like to see African Views doing more on that day?
Well, again, that's going to be up to Wally. I mean,
I should be asking that to Dr. Wally then.
Yes, and I cannot determine that, but I'll be happy to participate in whatever he's cooking up. He's the chef.
I should remind you, we are recording this and we will hold you accountable. Get close to that day.
Yeah, I'm the sous chef. I cut up the vegetables and whatnot, put them in the pot. So.
Absolutely. No, really appreciate your contribution and your wise words, and also just being this light to us, the youth, and just keep on expanding that knowledge, and we'll keep on doing the same thing. I appreciate your presence, sir, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good.